on to some of the more practical aspects, and we're going to start with the sleepover volunteers. Now, if you're not sleeping over, I do encourage you to not sleep over this talk, because it gives you that impression, that sense of the scope of the shelter, the reach of the shelter, the sort of things that the sleepover volunteers are asked to do. I think it's particularly helpful if you're doing breakfast to have an understanding of what's going on with the sleepover volunteers as well. Great, so slides, that's me, isn't it? Yeah, good, there we go. So, you can just read this, of course, and I'll talk over it a little bit. So, if you're a sleepover volunteer, the key person to have in your phone and etched into your brain is your team leader. So your team leader is your point of contact. We have 7 team leaders that between us cover the 7 days of the week. If you've already signed up, you might already have been contacted by that team leader. You might already have been allocated some days. But don't worry, the team leader will be known to you if you're sleeping over. They're the main point of contact. And they will work on the schedule and they will inform you about the rota for the sleepover. It's really critical that people stick to the dates that they've offered, because if we don't have 2 volunteers sleeping over, we have to close the shelter that night. Now, we've never had to close the shelter because we have emergency volunteers as well. So you'll also get a reminder beforehand as well. And it's critical that if you can't do it, we understand that life happens. If you can't do it, just get in touch with your team leader as soon as possible and they'll be able to find someone else. Okay, don't leave it to the last minute. Things happen. A couple of years ago, one of my volunteers broke his knee the day he was going to come sleep over, and we found someone else. Of course, mild panic, but you know, things happen. But just keep us informed. And if you use electronic calendar, put it in your calendar. That's great. What do you bring as a sleepover volunteer? Beds are provided, and all you need to do is bring a sleeping bag, a pillow, and a top sheet if you want. There are bits and pieces of bedding in the shelter that you can use if you forget your stuff, so it's not the end of the world, but it's a lot easier if you bring your own stuff and take it away. We ask you to arrive at the meal venue at 7 p.m. or by 7 p.m. If you're able to get there a little bit earlier, that's absolutely fine. We're quite strict on not letting the guests in until around then, because the meal was typically served at 7:30, and we want to give the cook team that little bit of space to just get sorted and start cooking without having to be disrupted in making teas and coffees and conversing with the guests. So it gives them that little bit of time. So you might end up waiting at the door with the volunteers, just saying, oh, we'll open the doors for you soon. Okay, and if you just stick to that, that will be great. And then when they do come in, you know, the whole character of the place will change, conversations will start, it becomes a very social environment, and the cook team will be better prepared to deal with that once they've got going, of course. So the times, we'd ask you to keep the times quite strictly. The shelter itself officially lets us in at 9 p.m. Okay, there are some occasions when we know that nothing is happening and it might be really cold, and so we might go over a touch earlier. But depending on where your venue is, somewhere between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, you'll walk over to the actual shelter venue. Again, the team leader will be able to help designate that time so that you're there ready for 9 o'clock to go in. The team leader will also be aware of the code to get in and everything, and if they're not actually there for the sleepover themselves, they'll probably pass it on to you, but of course you'll have their phone number if you get stuck. Okay. Yeah, when you go in, it's if you've stayed over before, this will be very familiar to you, but if you haven't, it's the shelter we have in central Bromley is a single large room. It's used during the day, so we need to set the beds up every night. And so the guests are pretty good at that. They just get on, they support each other, and they help each other out if someone is a little unable to lift the heavy weights or whatever. they'll usually set up. Your job as a sleepover volunteer really is just to provide oversight to make sure everyone is sorted and everyone has their bedding ready, and maybe call on another guest to help them out if they're struggling, or you can help them out yourself. Your time will often be taken up doing two things. One is making teas and coffees, and the other one is sorting out any food donations we've had for the night, putting it in the fridge, and maybe clearing out the fridge for things that have gone off. So we've had very great generosity from places like Patisserie Valerie and Pret a Manger over the years, and we're hoping we'll get the same generosity this year. So just sorting that out, clearing out the fridge of the things that have gone off, that sort of stuff. It's fairly straightforward. We're quite strict on not letting guests into the kitchen. This is a health and safety policy issue for the shelter, and so the guests quickly get used to this. It's fine. You just need to be a little bit strict sometimes with some guests. We ask you to stick with that very tightly, please, because the goal, of course, is to protect the health and safety of the guests and protect the shelter, because, of course, without the shelter, they're all in trouble. So we really want that to stay as it is. We partition the area. It's a single room in the Bromley Central Shelter. So the female guests are separated from the male guests. And once that partition goes up, we ask that no male guests go into the female area. Okay, it might appear very friendly. There might be good camaraderie, but of course one of the female guests might be uncomfortable with that and might not be willing to say so. So the best thing is just to stick to that rule. And of course, if one of the female guests wants to sit and chat with one of the male guests, they can come out into the male area. That's absolutely fine, of course. We do have the occasional guest moving around at night, so you just have to keep an eye on that. You'd usually get some sleep. I mean, I would almost always get some sleep. Okay, we're not on guard there. We're there as an extra person to provide a connection to the shelter, and help provide a safe environment. So you can sleep, and people do get some sleep, of course. And the guests are great. They've got your back as well, actually. And some of the guests will wake you up if there's a concern or an issue as well. Okay, but of course, particularly as the lights go out and as they start falling asleep, it's good to be a little bit vigilant at that time as well. The guests will sometimes go out for a smoke, and they might want to go out of the shelter building. We have a back door, and it's absolutely fine for them to go out the back door if they want a smoke or a chat outside. Of course, there's a fence around the back as well. We close the front door off once they're in, and if someone goes out, like they want to go out because they want to meet someone, they're not coming back. Okay, that's one of the rules that's made clear to them, that once they're in the shelter for the night, they're in the shelter. One of the reasons for that, of course, is a lot of our guests might have difficulties with drugs or with alcohol. We don't want people going out, having alcohol, coming back, disrupting the shelter, making it unsafe. So we have quite a strict policy there. Okay, the guests get into it very quickly. Lights out is at 10:30. Of course, if there's a buzz and environment, everyone's chatting, and it ends up being 10:40. This is kind of their home that we're sleeping in, rather than the other way around. So, of course, we're a bit flexible. We have to have some compassion in how we enact these rules. Of course, we have a storage cupboard, and one of the biggest issues is as we go through the season, it gets messier and messier and messier, and it's really hard to keep track. Sometimes people lose things. They might accuse others of stealing things but find them later, so it can create some tension. So one of the things we ask, when you have time, just keep an eye on the storage cupboard. If you've got 10 minutes to sort through a few things, check with the guests if this jacket is theirs or this bag belongs to someone. That's fantastic. If you can do a little bit to keep it tidy, and every night we do this, then hopefully it will keep it tidier through the season. Don't be afraid to do a little bit of tidying. That'll be great. Similarly with the fridge and the storage cupboards as well. We have supplies. If you notice anything is low, just pass it on to your team leader. The next night volunteers will stock up. There's a cleaning rota. as well. The way that we do the cleaning rota is we don't define it, because often we don't know the guests that are going to be there in the next few nights. Okay, what we do is we ask the guests on the night and the morning to clean up. We have someone doing the toilets, someone sweeping the floors, someone cleaning the floors, mopping the floors. Okay, and we write that down. There's a piece of paper in the kitchen. We write it down, and then the person on the next night again would allocate who's doing what, but they can see who's been doing what the previous night, so you can target people accordingly. And the guests, of course, can see this list, so they might even sort it out themselves, and some of them will be very proactive there, because they're just keen to get it done, and they're very helpful. Okay. It's very important that no volunteer leaves the shelter overnight. We have to have two there all the time. If we really have to go out and get something, call your team leader, for example. If you've just arrived and you've forgotten something, there'll be people maybe in the cook team still there. You can call them, they'll bring it back. They can maybe pop it over for you. You never know. Okay, so just call on some help if you need it as well. We also ask that if it's possible that one of the sleepover volunteers walks over to breakfast with the guests. That has two benefits. Well, first of all, they don't have to go to breakfast, of course, but it helps people to go to breakfast, gives a bit of company. You can continue conversations, but also it helps the breakfast volunteers to know that the guests that have arrived at breakfast are all the shelter guests. It's very rare that other people turn up, but we just need to be careful. Great. Sunday breakfast is at the shelter as well. Nearly over. So I've said it many times already, your team leader is your key point of contact. Best not to bring valuables. It's a fairly safe environment, I've found, and no problems whatsoever. But just be on the safe side, don't bring any valuables. Phones are fine, everyone has a phone these days, that's absolutely fine, and it's also imperative really that you have a phone so you can call your team leader if you need to, but otherwise just bring the minimum things that you need overnight, as we said, the sleeping bag and any toiletries, etc, etc. Please don't give out your personal details to the volunteers. It might seem very obvious, but sometimes they might be persuasive. They might ask to borrow your phone because their phone's out of battery, for example, and you've obviously given them your phone number. So please try to avoid that. They can use each other's phones, I suppose, if they really need to make a phone call. Okay, and you also get your team leader who you can call on, and they can help you out. And maybe they could call someone, you could call someone and they could call you back, or something like this can happen. You could also put on the privacy on your phone so your number's blocked, so no one can see it as well, if you really feel like you need to make a phone call on behalf of the volunteer. Finally, to finalise with linking what Mark was saying, on occasion things do happen where guests are ill, or someone might get aggressive, or you feel unsafe. In that situation, calling your team leader might be sufficient, or it might not be. Don't be afraid to call 111 for medical advice. And they will call back with a doctor who can interview the guest and decide whether they need to go to A&E or not. Don't be afraid to call 999. I would say maybe, in my memory, maybe 3 times over the years that I can remember calling 999. But again, no one was in immediate danger, but it just helps out. Usually, one occasion was when someone was missing and we didn't know where they were. One occasion was when someone was very intoxicated with alcohol. So these sorts of things are typical reasons. Great. And when to call your team leader. So you might want to sort out most things by yourself, but don't be afraid to call your team leader. But we do ask that one of the sleepover volunteers calls the team leader in the morning. Maybe the team leader will arrange to call you for a brief verbal overnight report. Every team leader writes a report about every night, so the next night there's continuity in information and knowledge about the guests and events. There'll be a dinner. Anything you're unsure about, feel free. You'll settle down your knowledge very quickly. And it's the team leaders that are responsible for entering guests into the shelter. If you've got a reason that a guest is breaking the rules and you need to exclude them, and again, you can contact your team leader who can take charge of that situation. You don't have to worry about these difficult decisions. You're not alone ever in those. Okay. And there's some examples. A lot of guests might ask for money. Don't give them money. Some guests might ask for top-ups of their Oyster cards. We do this. We are very happy to help engage in assistance which enables guests to get back on their feet. That might be going to appointments, it might be going to view houses, so occasionally we'll top up their Oyster if we feel there's no other way for them to get to the venue. But we leave that to the team leaders to do, and we do that over dinner as well. So overnight that shouldn't happen, and if it does, you can just say no.